Hello, my name is Barbara Davies, and I have been invited to give you a short talk on the apparitions for the diocesan pilgrimage. Let me start by a short story. One day, I was sitting at the grotto in Lourdes, and a voice from my left cried out, "Bernadette!" And from the right came the reply, "Mary." I can assure you I was wide awake and I was not undergoing some profound mystical experience. The fact is, two French women were simply having a conversation there, right in front of the grotto. But it was a curious experience, and it brought home vividly the fact that whatever else one may say about the phenomenon that is Lourdes today, it all began with a conversation between two young women. Many things can, of course, be said about the appearance of Our Lady in the grotto in 1858. But in this short talk, I want to concentrate on just three. They are all mentioned in the very first words that Our Lady addressed to Bernadette on Thursday, February the 18th. It was the third time she had appeared to the child, but the first time she spoke. The lady asked, "Would you have the grace to come here for 2 weeks?" It refers to time, to place, and to persons. Mary asked Bernadette if she would come every day for 2 weeks. She asked the child to come here, to the same spot where she had now appeared 3 times. And it was Bernadette whom Mary asked to come, not someone else for the moment. So let us look at the question of time. The day before Our Lady said these words was Ash Wednesday, which meant that the 2-week block of the apparitions would all take place during Lent. Here are the apparitions. 3 first, then the block of the 2 weeks, all taking place in Lent, and then 3 apparitions after Lent. Lent, as we know, is a very special liturgical time. The Church goes into retreat to spend 40 days with Jesus in the desert. We are invited to spend more time in prayer, doing acts of penance, including giving alms to the poor. In 1858, the Bishop of Lourdes, Bishop Lawrence, was concerned about the spiritual life of his people. And so he asked his priests to preach very specially during 2 weeks that Lent on prayer and penance. Now, Bernadette's parish priest, Father Peramau, had tried without success to find a preacher. How could he know that the Mother of God would come herself to fulfill that role? So during the 2 weeks, the lady asked Bernadette to do several small acts of penance, telling her that this would be for the conversion of sinners. These acts were things a child could do. Yet these small acts are colored by the fact that in daily Mass, the whole Church was listening to the prophet Isaiah tell of a suffering servant, someone who would be despised and rejected, but who would, by his suffering, save his people from their sins and from death. The Blessed Mother was teaching Bernadette that even she, Bernadette, could enter into the great sacrifice of Jesus, the Son of God, the suffering servant evoked by Isaiah. People scoffed at Bernadette's gestures, and when she covered her face in the mud that was caused by the spring that the lady had led her to discover Bernadette, like Jesus, was thought to be mad and was rejected by the crowd who had begun to follow her to the grotto. There was another great cause of suffering for Bernadette, worse even than all the interrogations she had to endure. On 2 days of the fortnight, the lady did not come to the grotto. Bernadette was sure that she had offended her and was deeply saddened. It's worth recalling that the lady never said she would come. She merely asked Bernadette to do so. All the while, Mary was teaching Bernadette how to suffer in union with her son. Later, however, this absence argued in Bernadette's favor, as someone said, if the child is making all of this up, why would she make up that the lady didn't come on 2 days? Before we leave the subject of time, let me note that Mary appeared on 2 days which were dedicated to her. The 25th of March, which is of course the Feast of the Annunciation, and July the 16th, the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, an order dedicated to a life of prayer and penance. Our Lady clearly knows when we are celebrating her feasts, and she clearly likes to celebrate them with us. She knows then about our feasts and our celebrations too. Bernadette's mother, Louise, died on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December the 8th, and the parish priest, Father Peramal, who had helped Bernadette so much, died on the day we celebrate Our Lady's birthday, September the 8th. You may think of all these as mere coincidences. In fact, they tell us that since God became man, time and eternity are united in Jesus, and that heaven really does know what's happening on earth today as we speak. During those first 3 apparitions, Mary appeared to Bernadette on a Thursday, a Sunday, and a Thursday again. Did she know that these days were days when Bernadette didn't have to go to school? In our relationship with God, time matters. Place. The grotto of Massabielle, where Our Lady appeared, was a truly awful place. A little outside of town, it was in fact the rubbish dump, more frequented by wild boar than by people. It was also a frightening place. And parents told their naughty children that they'd be sent to Massabielle as punishment. So why did Bernadette go there? Because it was full of the bones and sticks which her mother needed in order to sell them to have a few coins with which to buy meager food for her family. Why did Mary go there? Well, that's a good question, and one we do well to ask, even if she's the only one who can answer. But let us recall that since the grotto is north-facing, the sun never shines in it. Yet when Mary appeared, she was preceded by a bright light. And in that light, Bernadette could see that the lady was dressed in pure white, with a sash the color of the sky, and a rose on each foot the color of the sun, the same as the chain of a rosary she carried. By Our Lady's presence, the whole place was transformed. On March the 25th, she gave a possible explanation for this. On that day, Bernadette repeatedly asked to know the lady's name. The vision smiled, turned her eyes upwards towards heaven, and said, I am the Immaculate Conception. No one had ever used this phrase before of the mother of Jesus. Bernadette had never heard it and could not possibly have invented it. On being told that that was what the lady said in answer to his request to know her name, Abbé Piramal was finally able to believe what he had begun to suspect, that the Mother of God was indeed appearing to Bernadette Soubirous. Why was this so decisive? First, even though the church had proclaimed just 4 years earlier that Mary had started her life, meaning from her very conception, free from all stain of sin, meaning that she was immaculate, still no one had ever given her this as a name. Secondly, the words mean something very positive. At the time of the Annunciation, the angel greeted Mary with the words, "Hail, you who have been filled with grace." He wondered at the presence of God that he found in her, a presence so complete that sin had never touched her, not even for a split second at her conception in the womb of her mother Anna. Why was this? Mary was to be the mother of the very Son of God, and in her the Father prepared a place fit for him. The Son of God, Isaiah's suffering servant who came to save his people from their sins, first blessed his own mother with a unique freedom from sin. And the Holy Spirit's work of redemptive grace, what St. Paul calls the new creation, began in her so that the Son could be born of her. Mary is the person who, in all her freedom and beauty, appeared to a young girl in a dark, dank, filthy grotto, a place of punishment, a place which depicts so well the ugliness of sin and its fruit, eternal death. Mary came to bring us the light of her Son and to invite us all to turn back to God in him. Through the sacraments, Jesus can work in each one of us a miracle of grace that sets us free from sin too, free to love unconditionally. Mary never spoke of physical cures. Those which have taken place in Lourdes are, as in the Gospel, signs which point beyond themselves. The Mother of the Redeemer knows that sickness and death are not the worst things that can happen to us. Her Son came to save us from a sicklier sickness and a deadlier death. And this is why she asked for a church to be built where the 7 sacraments could be celebrated, and for people to come to the grotto in pilgrimage or on procession, to be the church journeying together on earth towards our true home in heaven. Finally, what do Mary's words teach us about persons? Who was the person to whom Mary communicated this message? Bernadette Soubirous had just turned 14. She was a sickly, unschooled, illiterate child. Such was the plight of the family that had a relative not let them use a disused prison cell, they would literally have been living on the streets. In 1858, had a rumor gone around town that the Mother of God was to appear, And had a list been drawn up of the pious ladies to whom she was most likely to appear, well, obviously Bernadette would certainly not have been on that list. That much is obvious, but there is more. Had a second list been drawn up of those to whom Mary was least likely to appear, Bernadette's name would not have been found on that list either. As someone said, the child was simply too insignificant to be considered, even to be excluded. Yet without Bernadette, there's no doubt there would be no Lourdes as we know it today. And it's equally true that without Lourdes, there would be no Bernadette, as she is known and loved throughout the world. She is the person to whom the Blessed Virgin gave the grace of an extraordinary time of 18 encounters. During that third apparition, Bernadette had been prompted by a certain woman of the town to offer the lady in the grotto a quill and some paper with the request, would you be so kind as to write down your name and your message? This was expressed in the most respectful terms she could find. The lady in the grotto merely laughed, and Bernadette started to laugh too. For the lady said that it would not be necessary. And it was then that she said the question we have been considering. Would you have the grace, the goodness, the kindness to come here every day for 2 weeks? In other words, the Mother of God addressed this impoverished child in the same terms of respect with which she herself had been addressed. Was she mocking the child? Surely not. She was manifesting the love and the respect that God has for each and every person, whatever our state and status in life. One of Bernadette's comments bears witness to this. She looked at me, the child said, as if I were a someone. Another goes in the same line. We spoke to each other as one person speaks to another. On one occasion before leaving her, the lady bowed slightly towards Bernadette. Out of respect, Mary spoke to Bernadette in her local patois, not in French, a language the child barely understood. And had Mary accepted to write down her message, that would have immediately excluded Bernadette, who could neither read nor write at the time. No, it was Bernadette whom Mary chose as her messenger, and no one else. Nor did the lady disdain her poverty. During one of the final apparitions, Bernadette mistakenly used a friend's rosary. The lady noticed and asked Bernadette where her own rosary was, telling her to use that one. But the lady was aware of the other people present at the grotto. Madame Millet, who had suggested the quill and the paper, asked if her presence disturbed the lady. Bernadette asked her and gave Mary's reply that Madame Millet could stay. Noting that they could not see her, someone else asked Bernadette if the lady could see them. Yes, she could. Her eyes wandered around the grotto, stopping from time to time, now happy, now sad. After an early apparition, Bernadette got up and placed her candle at the foot of the rock before leaving. When asked why she did this, she said the lady had asked her to. Thus began the tradition of candles at the grotto and a torchlight procession. All this was willed by Our Lady herself. Clearly, she wants to carry the prayers of every single person to God. In Bernadette, Mary perhaps saw echoes of herself. Bernadette said the lady was the same age and the same size as herself. In other words, about 14. The age Mary probably was at the Annunciation, both girls being on the verge of womanhood. In the Gospel, Mary is humble and discreet. So was Bernadette, and remains so throughout her whole life. The committee that Bishop Lawrence set up to examine the apparitions interviewed Bernadette inside the grotto on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December the 8th, 1858. Within 6 months, they had given the bishop their answer, supporting Bernadette's claims. The bishop waited 3 years before he publicly affirmed that the girl was worthy of belief. The finger of God is here, he said, adding that the best proof of the apparitions was Bernadette herself. Bernadette's yes was yes, and her no was no, much as Mary of Nazareth must have been. When asked if she expected one of her questioners to believe the answer she had given, Bernadette merely replied, "I was asked to tell you, not to make you believe it." Truly, God chooses the foolish to confound the wise and the weak to confound the strong. In the person of Bernadette Soubirous, we see that God's ways really are not our ways, that his love is not conditioned by what we can do and the titles we bear. God loves us first and he loves us last, and he wants us to live life to the full, happy with him for all eternity. Poor, simple, sickly though she was, Bernadette served God in his great plan of redemption. She tells us that each one of us can do so too. Whether we go to Lourdes sick or well, young or old, active or incapacitated, we all have our part to play. And if you haven't discovered yours yet, ask the lady in the grotto to tell you what it is.